It was supposed to be the proudest day of my life. My name is Rebecca Collins, I'm 42 and I had just done the impossible. I finished a degree I started 10 years ago, the one I chipped at between double shifts, school lunches, and the kind of late-night quiet where you hear the fridge hum like it's counting down with you. I graduated with honors. I walked that stage in a cap my daughter once colored on with glitter glue because it looked too serious. I should have been floating. Instead, there were 5 empty chairs. Everyone else had clusters, bouquets, suit jackets draped over the backs of chairs, kids with homemade signs that said, "Jo Amum," or "We knew you could." I kept glancing to the aisle like a reflex, like my eyes believed what my heart couldn't, that at any second the doors would lift and my husband Daniel would hustle in with Eli and Maya in tow. Eli complaining about the tassel, Maya bouncing, Daniel mouthing, "Traffic." And we'd all laugh about it later over pasta. I held that picture so tightly it left marks. It didn't happen. They called my row. The dean's handshake was firm, the camera flash bright, the applause polite. My smile felt like something I borrowed. I looked out and saw a sea of faces opening like flowers for other people. For me, the air just stayed still. Quick favor before I tell you the part that knocked the air out of me. If you have ever had to clap for yourself because the people you love didn't show up, drop an "I'm here" in the comments, hit like so this reaches someone who needs it tonight, and subscribe. We tell the hard stories here so nobody feels crazy for wanting basic care. Out on the steps afterward, the sun was loud. There were caps in the grass, a trumpet from the music building, the smell of something sugary from a food truck. I pulled my phone like it could explain the day to me. No texts. No missed calls. I scrolled the family thread out of a habit you learn young. Maybe I missed something, and there was like a slap with a smile. Mark, my brother barbecue today. Burgers at 2, pool at 3, board games after. Potato salad contest. Don't be late. Mom, we're bringing Nana's corn. Daniel, I'll grab buns. Kids want to try the slide. The timestamp, 2:13 p.m. They were plating burgers at the exact minute I moved my tassel. I typed "It's my graduation" and deleted it. Typed "I'm at the steps alone" and deleted that too. Shame is funny like that. You didn't cause it, but it still makes you clean up after it. I walked to the car with my diploma under my arm like a plank of wood you carry because your house is leaking. The dashboard said it was 78 outside. Inside it felt colder. At a red light I saw a reflection of my cap in the rearview mirror and took it off because I couldn't stand my own silhouette. At home there was a note on the counter in Daniel's quick flat handwriting. At Mark's. Pool's already out. We'll be late. Don't wait up. I stared at it until the ink looked wet again. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go. It buzzed again. And again. 12 times before I flipped it over, 24 by the time my hands stopped shaking. Then 45. I answered on the 46th like you pull the pin on something. Rebecca. Daniel's voice was 2 octaves higher, a sound I didn't recognize. It's Eli. Listen, we need to talk. Urgently. I didn't breathe. Is he? He fell. The new slide. Mark added these stupid metal bars. Eli wanted to impress the cousins. He says his arm hurts, he can't move his fingers right, and he keeps saying his vision is fuzzy. We're headed to Mercy General. Please, can you meet us? Something inside me split cleanly the way glass does when it's scored just right. Part of me was still on the auditorium steps, the empty chairs like teeth. Another part was already in the hospital corridor, entering the smell of bleach and lemon. I grabbed my keys. Driving, I kept thinking in loops you can't reason with. He should have been in my row. He should have been bored and kicking my chair. He should have said, "That name's my mom." He should not have been on a slide trying to look brave for people who didn't save a seat for me. The automatic doors parted and the ear swallowed me. That fluorescent light makes everyone look like a confession. Daniel was pacing, jaw wired tight, one hand making a fist, opening, making a fist. Maya sat small on a molded chair, her hair wet, chlorine curling it like paper. My mother, lipstick too red, voice too bright, held a cup of hospital coffee like a prop. "Where is he?" I asked. I didn't say hello. "X-ray," Daniel answered. "They think the wrist is broken, maybe the forearm." He hit his head too, said the words, seeing sparkles. "They're doing scans." He paused and his eyes flicked to my chest like he needed proof I remembered how to breathe. "I called you." "Yes," I said. 45 times. A nurse appeared with a clipboard and a voice that made you believe bad news could be told safely. Collins? Wrist fracture is likely. Will cast once imaging reads. CT is to rule out a brain bleed. He's stable. You can see him between tests. We followed her into a hallway of whispers and curtains. Eli looked both older and smaller on the gurney, face pale, freckles screaming against it. There was a plastic brace on his arm and a strip of dried blood at his hairline. He blinked, trying to be brave, and when he saw me he tried to sit up too fast. "Mom," he said, and the word broke open something hard in me. "I'm sorry I missed your thing." My throat burned. "I'm here now," I told him and touched his hair. It was still damp, smelling like summer. "Tell me where it hurts." He pointed with his chin because his good hand was trapped under a blood pressure cuff. "Here. And here. And my eyes feel like TV static." I kissed his temple and looked at the nurse. "What does rule out look like tonight?" She didn't sugarcoat it. "He'll be in and out for scans. If it's just the arm, that's straightforward. If the CT shows anything, we'll page neuro, keep him overnight." My mother exhaled, loud, theatrical. "Thank God we were all there," she said, angling her sentence like a mirror. "Imagine if he'd fallen without family around." Some sentences are so shameless they go quiet in the room. Daniel stared at the floor. I kept my voice level because I've learned that calm is harder to dismiss. "Imagine," I said, "if he hadn't been at a pool at all. Because he had a place reserved in an auditorium." "Rebecca," my mother warned, sharp, the way she says stop embarrassing me without the words. A tech pushed the gurney toward imaging. Eli's fingers spidered toward me and I walked alongside, matching the rhythm of the wheels. We stopped outside a heavy door. The tech gave me the look professionals give parents when they have to separate them. "We will take care of your heart while you wait." I let go. Waiting rooms invent new minutes. Maya crawled into my lap even though she's 11 and pretends she's too old. Daniel sat across from us, hands pressed between his knees, eyes shining with the kind of panic that makes you confess all the ways you tried to multitask love. "I should have come to the ceremony," he said, voice raw, like someone had sanded it. "I told myself." Mark said, "It's 3 hours of names, they'll be bored, we'll celebrate big at dinner." I thought I was choosing kindness for the kids. He swallowed. I was choosing comfort for myself. I held Maya tighter. "There's still dinner," I said, and the sentence tasted like pennies. My phone lit up with the family thread again because the world refuses to stop for surgery or shame. "Mark, how's the little man?" "Pool's closed for the night." "Mom, we're in the ER doing everything we can." "Me, he's in imaging. We'll know more soon." There was a beat and then, "Mom," to the group, we're all devastated. This day took a turn. "Let's focus on Eli, not on any misunderstandings. Family first." It took effort not to laugh so loudly they'd ask me to leave. Family first. The phrase people embroider to cover the stain. The nurse returned. "You can come back," she said. "He's moving to a bay, casting soon. CT is pending radiology review." We stood around Eli like planets that had to learn a different orbit. Maya asked if she could sign his cast later. Daniel stroked his hairline, the place the CT had mapped a few minutes ago. I stood at the foot of the bed, hands on the metal, because I needed a thing that felt solid. My father arrived then, breathless, tie askew, like he'd jogged from a place where he'd been important. He patted my shoulder and then pivoted to statements. "How is he? The most important thing is we're all here. These things are unpredictable. Boys will be boys. Slides are slippery. Slides don't text me, we'll be late. Don't wait up." I said. It came out without permission. He flinched, then rearranged his face. A resident came to set the arm. Eli watched every move, teeth gritted, the way kids stare down pain like it's a bully at recess. When the cast hardened, the room exhaled. We were waiting for the CT read when my mother raised her chin toward me, that tilt that always means she's about to turn a memory into evidence. "I gave up bridge for this," she said softly, like she was donating blood. We were all on our way out the door for dessert when Daniel called. "You can't accuse us of not showing up." I counted to 5 because my therapist taught me that 5 seconds is the difference between a reaction and a boundary. "You didn't show up for me," I said. "That's the sentence you keep avoiding." Daniel's face crumpled. He put both hands over it like he couldn't stand to watch himself in the mirror he'd been handed. "I'll make it right," he said into his palms. "Start by saying it plain," I said. I chose the barbecue over your graduation. I chose the barbecue, he said, forcing the words out like splinters. Over your graduation. The nurse pulled the curtain aside half an inch as if the room itself wanted fresh air. CT is back, she said, voice neutral. The doctor will discuss it with you. The air changed. Everyone rearranged their posture as if making room for fate. Even my mother went quiet. While we waited, time did that elastic thing. It stretched and then snapped. My brain took the opportunity to replay the last 5 years like an unkind highlight reel. The nights I fell asleep at the kitchen table, a highlighter staining my hand. Eli asking if homework was more important than his science fair. Maya leaving me notes that said, "Good luck on your big test, mommy," in bubble letters. Daniel texting, "Mark's got tickets. Join us after class?" And me answering, "Can't, midterm." I thought about the promise I made myself at the beginning. When I finish, they'll see me. I had pictured it with chairs full and hands sore from clapping. It turns out sometimes seeing you requires a crisis. The doctor came in with a face you couldn't read, which is its own kind of cruelty. He smiled a small, correct smile. "Good news first," he said. "The CT is clear. No bleeding, no swelling. He'll have a headache and some caution signs to watch for, but we're not admitting. The wrist is a clean distal radius fracture. We've said it well. Cast for 6 weeks. Follow-up in orthopedics." The room breathed. Maya started to cry in relief and then pretended she wasn't. Daniel put his head against the rail and thanked the metal. My mother said, "Praise the Lord," as if the Lord had RSVP'd. "Can I ask a question?" I said. "About the fall." The doctor nodded. "Those metal bars by the pool slide, does that," I swallowed, "make this kind of break more likely?" He glanced at the chart. "Mechanism matters," he said. "But kids fall in creative ways. The important thing is we've ruled out the dangerous stuff." The nurse went over discharge instructions like a teacher handing you a chance to do better next time. "No sports for a bit, limit screens if his head aches. Wake him once tonight to be sure he rouses easily. And, this part is not medical advice but parent to parent," she lowered her voice. "Make him feel brave for telling you what hurt rather than for pretending it didn't." "Thank you," I said, and heard how much that sentence was doing inside me. We got Eli settled, tucked his new plaster into a sling, signed 18 forms, and rolled him toward the exit in a chair that squeaked like a tiny alarm. The automatic doors opened and the night smelled like a pool that didn't belong to us. At the curb, Daniel turned to me. His eyes were clear the way a sky gets after a storm moves on and shows you what it hid. "Come home with me," he said gently. "Please." He looked over at our son, then back at me. "I need you to see us try." "We'll talk tomorrow," I said. It wasn't punishment. It was a boundary. I kissed Eli's forehead, then Maya's, and watched them drive away with the care a person uses to place a glass on a table that could tip. My phone buzzed. "Mark again. How's our champ?" I typed, "He's okay." Then I added, because something in me had finally stopped apologizing for existing, "He won't be swimming at your house again." 3 dots. Then nothing. Then, "Mom, privately honey about today, no one meant to hurt you. Your graduation was, well, ceremonies are tedious and the kids." I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and didn't answer. Driving home, I noticed every porch light like it had been lit for me. Inside, the house held its breath the way a place does when it's waiting to see whether it gets to be a home again. I put my diploma on the kitchen counter next to Daniel's note. The 2 rectangles looked like a before and after. I took a picture of them side by side and then deleted it because some receipts are for your own keeping. Upstairs, I stood in front of the mirror and saw a woman who had walked a stage alone and then walked into a hospital because love doesn't require an audience. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the day catch up. The quiet was loud, but it wasn't empty. It felt like a room where you're about to rearrange the furniture. Pushpin if you're still with me, and if any part of your chest went hot reading this. Tap like so it finds someone scrolling at midnight who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss part 2. This isn't the end. It's where the real conversation starts. About boundaries, apologies that aren't strategies, and what repair looks like when the ribbon-cutting day was left unattended. When I finally lay down, my body did that thing where it lists everything it's been holding. Knees, jaw, shoulders, the spot between shoulder blades that stores unspoken sentences. I breathed until the list got bored. Just before sleep found me, my phone vibrated on the nightstand with a push alert from the local station. One of those cards that steals your lock screen and your peace with it. Follow-up. Community rallies for widow. Family responds. Preview line, we made mistakes, says brother. I stared at it. Part of me wanted to tap. Part of me wanted to throw the phone into the laundry basket and declare a holiday from other people's versions of my day. I set it face down. Tomorrow, I told myself. We decide tomorrow what we believe. And the house finally exhaled. I didn't tap the notification. I let the phone go dark and tried to sleep like a reasonable person. Grief is not reasonable. When morning sifted through the hotel curtains, I woke with that brittle post-cry clarity and the kind of headache that reminds you you're still alive. A tray had been delivered sometime before dawn. Oatmeal, berries, tea, and a small white card in tidy handwriting. You are not alone. Riverview staff. I ate 3 bites, stared at the rest, and forced down 2 more because the nurse had said food is a kind of medicine. Miss Patel called at 9. Repairs are underway. Thermostat plumbing mitigation. The community fund covered the deposit. Her voice carried a softness I didn't realize I was starving for. There's also a request from a local station for an interview. You are under no obligation. Why me? I asked, though of course I knew. People loved a story with a villain you could put a last name to. You, she said, are the story. Not the spectacle. You get to decide. I said I needed an hour. Then I did something that felt both small and radical. I took a shower long enough to fog the mirror and laid my clean clothes on the bed like a promise. When I looked up, my reflection looked back without flinching. Not strong. Not dramatic. Just deciding. I called the station and spoke to the reporter who had been at the hospital. Michael Chin, the man with the careful eyes. Ground rules, I said. No family screenshots. No ambush. No pity music. If we do this, we talk about systems and support, not just a headline that trends for 12 hours. Agreed, he said. You set the terms. We met in a small conference room on the hotel's 2nd floor. He arrived with a producer and a single camera operator who adjusted the light like it might bruise me if left too bright. Michael didn't sit right away. Before we roll, my mother was alone when my father passed. The neighbors fed her until we could fly home. I know what it means when strangers see you. The interview didn't begin with tragedy. It began with a garden. James thought your tomatoes would win the state fair, he prompted. He was wrong, I said and smiled despite myself. They'd win the world. We talked about what a 6-month contract looks like when you sketch your future across a map. About paperwork in a language you can't read and a hand you keep holding after the person is gone. About a text that says try Uber and what it unspools inside you. When he asked what I wanted from telling this story, I didn't mention my family once. 2 things, I said. First, a checklist to keep someone from freezing alone. A neighbor script, a city script, a who turns the thermostat script. Second, permission for people like me to stop asking the wrong wells for water. After we filmed B-roll at the house. The street was chalked with salt rings from the plow. The porch was a crime scene of water stains. The restoration crew, 2 women with tool belts and the concentration of surgeons, worked without theatrics. We'll get the bones dry, one said as if she was talking about me as much as the house. When the segment aired that evening, trim, humane, stubbornly unsensational, the station posted a link to a new resource page. Emergency contacts, how to winterize, how to ask for help without apologizing, how to assist without intruding. The comments were not kind to my family and I didn't read beyond the first dozen. There is no healing in the world's appetite for a stranger's villain. At 10:17 p.m. Troy texted, "We saw your interview. You could have handled this privately." At 10:19 Mom, "Amelia, you've humiliated us." At 10:23 Dad, "I'm reading." I set the phone face down again and watched the river instead. Lights braided themselves across the water. Somewhere someone's dinner burned. Somewhere a baby finally slept. Somewhere a family with fewer tools and more tenderness moved toward each other after the news, not because of it, but because that's what they'd always done. The next morning brought a different kind of call. "This is Laura from the City Office of Community Initiatives," the voice said. "Your interview gave us a shove we needed. Would you consult on a pilot we've been too slow to launch? We're calling it Welcome Home. For people returning from hospitalization, bereavement, deployment. Heat checks, food checks, friend checks. Small things that add up to life." "I'm not a policymaker," I said. You're a person who has the map because you got lost, she replied. That's better. We scheduled a meeting. I hung up and felt something warm and complicated expand in my chest. Purpose doesn't erase grief, but it absorbs some of the spill. Around noon, I let myself walk the few blocks to the river path. The air was cold enough to nip but bright, and the people who passed me did the Northwest thing, friendly but unsmothering. A teenager zoomed by on a scooter blasting a song I didn't recognize. An older couple shared a thermos on a bench like it was a secret. Mid-stride, my phone buzzed again, this time a number I didn't know. Is this Amelia? The caller asked. I'm Nora. I teach at your alma mater. I advise students on study abroad. We have gaps. Could we talk? I said yes. We made it a Zoom for the next day. After I hung up, I laughed softly, a sound that surprised me. James would have made that world's most lovable tomatoes joke again and then kissed my forehead like he was planting something for later. By the time I circled back to the hotel, my body wanted food and my brain wanted quiet. I ate half a grilled cheese in the lobby and smiled at the concierge who had started greeting me with, "Welcome back, Mrs. Henderson," the first time the word didn't slice. Upstairs, I opened my email and found what Michael had promised to send, a link to the segment and the resource page. I watched once, not as myself but as a stranger who might need the checklist. Then, because I could feel the attention arc cresting online, I made a decision. I filmed a short message on my phone, holding it at arm's length. No filters, no polish, just a person talking to people. If you've watched this far, thank you. If you've ever had to rebuild after a week that broke you, you're my people. I'm turning my comments off for now because I'm healing. But if this helped, keep it moving. Send the resource link to someone who needs a plan before they need a rescue. And hey, if you want more of these quiet, honest stories about grief, boundaries, and finding your way back, tap like so the algorithm knows who to reach, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Not for me. For the next person who needs a hand before they know to ask. I posted it where it needed to go and turned my phone face down for the third time in 2 days. It felt like a ritual now. Choose where the attention lands, choose when the noise stops. The city meeting happened in a windowless room with bad coffee and earnest people. Laura, a policy analyst named Javi, a 9/11 liaison, a representative from the public utility, a librarian, and, this made me smile, a mail carrier who knew more about who was alone on which block than any database ever could. I told them about the thermostat, about the shutoff valve, about the socks soaked through because your brain stops making rational choices when the air hurts to breathe. What would have helped? Javi asked, pen ready. 3 things, I said. A neighbor with a script that starts, "I'll be on your porch at 5. You don't have to talk if you don't want to." A city text that says, "Storm coming. Reply 1 if you're out of town, 2 if you need a heat check, 3 if you can check on someone." And a designated first 48 buddy who watches your face to make sure it's not turning the color of forgetting. The 911 liaison nodded. We can tie carbon monoxide alerts to wellness checks without sending units unless there's a trigger. With consent. The utility rep said the words I'd been waiting to hear. We can put critical flag notes on accounts for bereavement periods. Not forever. For a season. The librarian piped up with quiet ferocity. We'll print the checklists. Put them at every branch. Grief makes the internet feel like a swamp. Paper in hand is a lifeline. We left with a draft. I left with a folder that felt like it weighed both more and less than it should. That afternoon my father called. I nearly didn't pick up. When I did, he didn't clear his throat or start with, "Your mother." He started with, "I was wrong." I sat on the edge of the bed. About what? I made my voice neutral because I wanted to hear him earn the specifics. About thinking help is a matter of convenience, he said. About assuming you'd be fine because you've always been fine. I watched the segment. I recognized the house, but I didn't recognize my response to my own daughter. He didn't ask to come over. He didn't ask to be absolved. He asked, "Can I listen?" You talk. I don't defend. So I talked not about headlines but about mornings when the silence swallowed whole rooms. About sleeping in a chair because a bed is too much history at once. About asking for a ride and receiving a life lesson in project management. He said only once, "I hear you." When he ended the call, he didn't promise a future he couldn't deliver. He said, "I'll be reading," like he meant both policies in my face. That night, the hotel staff slid another card under my door. This one had a little drawing of a plant just sprouting. Day 2, it read, "Growth is rude that way, It happens while you're not looking. The next day I met with Nora and 2 students over Zoom. They told me exactly where the study abroad system falls apart when life does. Flights missed, grandparents ill, roommates gone silent. We sketched together what would become the first draft of a contingency fund and a call this person first network that relied on warm bodies, not websites. After we hung up, I ordered a cheap notebook and wrote on the first page, James Henderson Scholarship, emergency lines first. The resource page kept spreading, but slower now, like a steady river instead of a flash flood. People started sharing not my name but the checklist. That felt right. I took a walk every afternoon because the doctor said motion helps the brain metabolize grief. Sometimes I made it 2 blocks and turned back. Sometimes the cold bit hard enough that I cursed out loud and startled a dog who forgave me immediately. On the 4th morning at the hotel, I came down to the lobby to find Diane, the neighbor who'd called for help that first night, standing awkwardly by the fireplace, a Tupperware cradled like an offering. She wore boots with salt on them and the expression of someone who wasn't sure if this was welcome. I made soup, she said. You can throw it away. I just needed to do something that isn't calling 911. I laughed, and it didn't feel like betrayal to the sadness anymore. Come sit. Tell me about the kid who skateboards down the middle of our street like he's immortal. We sat. She gossiped kindly about the block, who needs their trash can brought in, who bakes when she's nervous, who pretends the yard work is a hobby but actually times it for when his ex walks by. It felt like being stitched back into a place I thought had spit me out. That afternoon, the city pilot went live in 3 zip codes. The text read, Winter storm alert. Reply 1 if you're away, 2 for a heat check, 3 if you can check on someone. Save this number. They'd built it in 36 hours. People replied. People volunteered. A dispatcher sent me the first anonymized report. Granddaughter flagged Nana in 2. Volunteer checked. Thermostat was off. Fixed. I cried for the 10th time in a week and didn't apologize to the empty room. Troy, meanwhile, posted an apology that used the words optics and misinterpreted, and a paragraph later mentioned how stress affects judgment. I didn't respond. Mom called and left a voicemail about the public pylon, and I set it to archive because my heart is not a PR firm. Dad sent a screenshot of the city text with a single line, replying 3. The house came back to itself in stages. Dehumidifiers first, then drywall backbones, then paint that didn't try to pretend nothing had happened. The restoration lead, whose name I finally learned was Vega, walked me through each step like a teacher. Gentle, factual, not once asking me to be grateful. We'll leave the scar behind the fridge, she said. Not because we couldn't smooth it, but because sometimes it helps to have one place you don't lie to yourself. A week after the interview, Michael sent a link to a follow-up. The pilot program, the library handouts, a quote from the utility rep, a quiet shot of a mail carrier sliding an envelope through a slot with the gentleness of a prayer. The piece ended not with my face, but with a split screen. A thermostat inching up and a pair of hands signing a thank you card to the stranger who showed up. If you're still watching and breathing with me here, if your chest loosens when strangers act like neighbors, tap like so this story keeps finding people who need a plan more than a plot twist. And subscribe if you want the rest of this in real time. How we go from 1 zip code to the whole city, how grief keeps trying to be the only character and we keep writing more. 2 days later, I stood on my new kitchen floor, warm now, resilient, and watched the thermostat hold steady at 68 like a small, faithful friend. I brewed coffee and texted Laura a list of feedback from the first wave. I sent Nora a draft budget for the emergency line item. I emailed Vega a photo of the back of fridge scar that looked from the right angle like a shoreline. I sent Dad a time for coffee at the diner where the waitress calls everyone honey and pretends not to notice when your eyes go glassy. On my way to the meeting, I passed the newsstand in the lobby and, on impulse, bought a paper. The bottom half of the front page showed a photo of a volunteer knocking on a door in the snow. Above it, in smaller type, a pull quote from a neighbor who had never met me. We don't need to be heroes. We just need to be on the porch at 5. I tucked the paper under my arm the way you tuck in a child's blanket. Outside, the cold bit my cheeks and the air smelled like pine and diesel. I thought of James, of tomatoes that win imaginary ribbons, of the way his laugh used to lift the room like a good song on low. I thought of how love doesn't disappear when a body does. It reroutes, stubborn as water. It finds a crack, a pipe, a hallway, a text thread, a neighbor's hand on a door. Defines you even when you forgot you left the light on. I pushed the diner door open and Dad looked up from a booth by the window, his coat still on, the steam from his coffee fogging the glass. He stood, and in the 3 steps it took me to reach him, I realized I was no longer walking into an argument or a performance. I was walking into a room where the first words could be exactly what they were. "I'm here," he said. "I see you," I answered. And then we sat and we began, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not lower my voice to fit inside someone else's comfort. I let it take up space, right-sized, honest, steady. Outside, the river moved on. Inside, the coffee stayed hot. Somewhere across town, a thermostat ticked up 1 degree and a volunteer knocked at a door, and a city kept a promise to a widow who had asked, one winter night, for a ride. I pushed the diner door open and Dad looked up from a booth by the window, his coat still on, the steam from his coffee fogging the glass. He stood, and in the 3 steps it took me to reach him, I realized I was no longer walking into an argument or a performance. I was walking into a room where the first words could be exactly what they were. "I'm here," he said. "I see you," I answered. We sat. The vinyl squeaked under us. A waitress with a silver bun and a name tag that read, May, topped off our cups without asking what we wanted, as if she understood this was a conversation best softened by heat. Dad's hands circled his mug, big knuckles, clean nails, a new tremor I hadn't noticed before. He looked like a man who'd practiced a speech and then decided against it. "I wrote you," he said finally. "I know," I said. "I read it. Twice. I keep thinking about the night they found you," he went on, eyes on the window. Outside, the river was a sheet of gray steel, the kind that looks cold even when the air is warm. "I keep thinking how close I came to being the man who lost his son-in-law and then his daughter because he was worried about appearances." He swallowed. "That's not the man I wanted to be." It was strange. A relief that he didn't barter for innocence with a list of small good deeds. He didn't say, "But we were busy," or "But we didn't know." He said the thing that was true. "I can meet you here," I said. In truth. We ordered pancakes and eggs we pretended to eat. Dad talked about the first summer he taught me to ride a bike, how he ran behind me, one hand on the seat, and how I yelled, "Don't let go," and how he did anyway because that's the job and the risk, both. He said somewhere along the way he mistook letting go for letting me fall alone. He said he had learned how to be visible at work, at church, in rooms where reputation paid the tab, and never learned how to be visible in a kitchen where a daughter said, "Please pick me up." "I can't promise I'll be perfect," he said, "but I'd like to practice out loud." "So would I said. "With rules. We built them like scaffolding over coffee rings. No gaslighting of past events. No you're being dramatic. Requests honored when they're simple and human. If we're unsure, we ask. If we mess up, we say it first." He wrote them down on a napkin with a pen that bled through, and when May returned with the bill, she slid 2 clean napkins across the table like she knew we'd need copies. On my way out, I texted the photo of the napkin to my therapist and to Linda with the caption, "Framework acquired." Then I stood on the sidewalk and watched Dad cross the street back to his car, shoulders less squared than usual, the gait of a man who had decided penance was not performance, it was practice. The river kept moving. I took a breath that felt like it had room in it. At home, the thermostat clicked and the radiators answered. A neighbor I only knew as Mr. H, 2 houses down with the azaleas, had left a casserole on the porch with a note that read, "Freeze half." I laughed. This city had turned into a choir that sang one lyric in 100 different harmonies. We show up. The next days were less cinematic and more ordinary, which is what healing looks like when it decides to stop auditioning for a movie. I learned the schedule of the grief group so well that Eleanor would smile when I walked in, as if timing itself were a form of progress. I set the Randy Posh quote the group kept taped to the coffee urn. "Brick walls are there to show us how badly we want something," beside a sticky note on my fridge. Want. A life that fits around love, not the other way. I didn't pretend to be okay for anyone. When the sad hit like weather, I let it rain. When it passed, I went outside and pulled weeds. One afternoon, the local station asked if I'd speak, not as the headline but as the aftermath. What happened after the story aired? Michaelchan wanted to know. What did the city's kindness change? What didn't it? I almost said no. It felt like returning to a stage I didn't choose. But then I thought of the people who had messaged me with their own versions of "No one picked me up," and how the difference between despair and endurance is often just one person keeping a porch light on. We filmed in my kitchen. They didn't shoot the water stains. They were gone now, drywall patched and painted a soft white the restoration company consultant had called Repose Gray. They filmed my hand on the thermostat, my hand on the coffee cup, my hand on the door handle. Hands do a lot of the lifting in grief. Faces just get the credit. When Michael asked what I wanted people to take away, I said, not blame. Blueprint. The blueprint for showing up is so boring you might miss it. Answer the phone, ask, what do you need? And then believe the answer. Somewhere in the middle of the interview, he asked if I'd say anything to my family if they were watching. I felt the old reflex, the one that starts listing justifications and deadlines. Rise and then fall. I'm building a life where the door is not locked, I said. It's also not revolving. That night after the segment aired, my phone filled with the kind of messages that knit a net. Your words fixed a small part of me. I called my sister. I installed a smart thermostat for my elderly neighbor because of you. And one from a name I hadn't expected. Lisa, my brother's girlfriend. It was a single line. Thank you for saying aloud what I've been whispering to him. I stared at the screen until the text went dim and then sat down at the table with the napkin and read the rules again. Troy called the next day. He didn't start with the media or clients. He started with, I watched the whole thing twice, then I walked around the block, then I came back and watched again. He inhaled, exhaled. The sound of a man who knows the first right action is a sentence he doesn't want to say. I was cruel, he said. Not just careless. Cruel. It didn't make the past smaller. It made the conversation possible. I'm not going to litigate the tape with you, I said, surprising myself. I'm going to tell you what I need if there's a future. 1. When I text you, answer the same day unless you are in an actual emergency. 2. No more triangulating through mom. 3. When you're asked to show up, the answer is yes unless you have a conflict you can name out loud with a date and a time. No more busy. 4. If you get defensive, we pause and reschedule. He was quiet. Somewhere on his end, I heard dishes. He said. Okay. And 5, I added, you apologize to the paramedic. He made a confused sound. The one who saw my phone and decided to risk your wrath for the sake of telling the truth, I said. You don't have to say her name on air. But you do have to say it to her face if I can find her. Okay, he said again but softer. Find her. We did. Her name was Avery. She had a small tattoo of a wave on her wrist, and when Troy stood in the bay of the firehouse and said, I'm sorry I made your honesty necessary, she nodded once, and the apology seemed to land somewhere it could be used. My mother remained the quiet center of a storm of her own making. Bridge Club moved on to a different story. The Hendersons found new dinner guests. She sent me a photo of a casserole she'd made and captioned it, Thinking of You, which somehow felt like the perfect emblem of a woman who could share a recipe before she could share regret. I didn't prod. I didn't plead. I let silence have its turn. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is decline to teach someone a lesson they refuse to learn. Dad kept showing up. He learned the route to my house that avoided the bridge with the worst traffic. He called on Sunday afternoons and said, I have 2 hours free, anything need doing? He installed a grab bar by the basement steps without making a speech about safety. He texted photos of sunsets without commentary, and I realized that was its own kind of fathering. Not look at me, but I saw this and thought of you. The scholarship launch became a date on the calendar not just for my sake, but for the small ecosystem of people who had begun to orbit the idea that grief can be translated into structure. Angela, our first recipient, sent me a tentative email asking if I'd review her travel plan. She had built-in margins, hotel near the hospital, contact numbers printed on paper in case her phone died, copies of documents in the cloud and on a keychain drive. I learned from your story, she wrote. I want my mom to have a flight if she needs it. I put my hand over my mouth and cried because there it was, the alchemy. Pain into policy. Story into scaffold. Love into logistics. On the morning of the announcement, the house was full in the way that feels earned, not crowded. Rena from work arrived holding a vase of sunflowers and a folder of congratulations from my team. Linda brought coffee and the exact pastries I hadn't told anyone I'd been craving. Diane from across the street came early to set out plates and whispered, Today I'm just your neighbor, not the lady who called 911. And we laughed, the kind that crawls up from relief and makes your shoulders shake. Dad came too. He wore the tie I'd bought him 3 Christmases ago and said, Do I look like a man who can listen? which is possibly the best question he has ever asked. Troy texted from outside, asking if he could bring Lisa in without making it about him. I said yes and then watched from the hall as he told Lisa, "Today I'm supporting, not starring." It felt like a tiny miracle. A man taking himself out of the center and noticing the room get bigger. I spoke from the living room. It wasn't a speech exactly, more like a letter I read aloud to a house that hummed back. I told them James loved how Singapore smelled like rain an hour before it actually rained, and how he would have rolled his eyes at the fuss and then stayed to stack chairs at the end. I told them the scholarship would cover not just flights and forms, but also the thing we never remember to budget for, human error. I told them the fund would pay for the line item called unexpected, for the late night cab, for the passport photo taken with a stranger's hand held just out of frame to steady yours, for the coffee your mother will need after a red-eye whether she comes or not. When I finished, the applause was that warm, non-showy kind that feels like hands on your back. Dad cried without hiding it. Troy clapped with his mouth closed and his eyes open. Lisa slipped me a note. "Your blueprint saved me from a family dinner last week." I said no and didn't apologize 18 times. The city kept showing up. A local hardware store offered a discount on weatherproofing to anyone who mentioned the segment. The hotel extended their grief rate program. Michael Chin emailed to say the station had started a show-up day once a quarter. Employees volunteering at the shelter that keeps space for people who are leaving funerals to empty houses. And then the anniversary came. I booked the flight to Singapore without drama. I still cried when I filled in the purpose of visit field. Visit grave. No emoji for that. No checkbox to tick bring love. I packed light. A dress James had liked, the first letter Dad had written, a printout of the scholarship announcement for the small community of people who had stood with me at the first funeral when my world was a wet paper bag. On the plane, the man in the window seat asked if I was traveling for business. "Something like that," I said. I didn't explain that grief feels like business sometimes. The paperwork of the heart, late fees for the feelings you ignored. Singapore was exactly as beautiful and humid as it had been the first time I stepped into it with James' hand in mine. The cemetery at dawn was a chorus. Birds trading songs, the city inhaling. I sat cross-legged in the grass and told him the whole year, the parts that sounded like a redemption arc and the parts that still sounded like a woman talking to herself in a kitchen because there was no one to listen at 3 a.m. I set the scholarship announcement next to the flowers and the letter from Dad on top of it. I said, "We are learning," and it didn't feel like a lie. Back in Portland, I brought home a small stone from the path that leads to his grave. I put it on the windowsill above the sink. It sits there now, catching light, reminding me that crossing oceans is sometimes a literal act and sometimes just a morning where you choose to answer your own question, "What do I need today?" with something kinder than survival. The second voicemail from my mother came 2 weeks later. It was the first one that sounded like a woman who knew words could be instruments instead of weapons. "I don't know how to say this," she began, "but I will try and be clumsy and hope you believe my intention even if my execution fails. I failed you. I failed James. I failed a daughter who needed a mother who could hold a coat at an airport. I can't make a pretty sentence out of something ugly. I can only say I want to learn." She paused. "I'll be at the community center on Thursday at 7. If you want to sit beside me while I listen, I will be there. If you don't, I will still be there." I didn't answer right away. I let the message live on my phone like a fragile animal I might scare away if I moved too fast. On Thursday I went. I don't know why exactly. Love, curiosity, the simple math that for months I'd been asking everyone to meet me where I was, and now someone had named a place. Mom sat in the second row, hands wrapped around a paper cup of bad coffee like it was a sacrament. She didn't reach for me when I arrived. She slid her purse to make space. The speaker that night was a woman who'd lost a son and learned how to turn her anger into advocacy for safer intersections. "Grief is a neighbor you didn't invite and you can't evict," she said. "So you teach it where the towels are and you ask it not to slam doors." People laughed, the kind of laugh that means, "I wish someone had said that a year ago." Mom didn't talk during the Q&A. She didn't talk during the milling around after, when people fold their chairs like origami and say, "See you next time." But when we stepped into the parking lot's sodium light, she said, "I wanted to be right more than I wanted to be kind. I'm trying to flip the ratio." "I don't have a rubric for this," I said. "I have rules and I have room." "Can we sit inside both?" she asked. "We can try," I said. Trying turned into a practice. We didn't do holidays, we did Tuesdays. We didn't do absolution, we did errands. Mom came with me to the farmer's market and didn't comment on my impractical bouquet. I went with her to a cardiology appointment and didn't say, "I told you so," when the doctor advised walks and less salt. We were not strangers. We were not who we had been. We were in a hallway where both the old room and the new room were visible, and neither was home yet. It was enough. On a gray Saturday, I stood by the river with Dad and Troy and we scattered a handful of flower petals where the current ran a little faster at the bend. We didn't say, "Goodbye." We said, "Keep teaching us." We said, "Look." We said nothing sometimes, which is its own kind of reverence. Later at the house, a knock at the door. A teen from down the block, hoodie half-zipped, eyes the particular stormy of adolescence. "Are you the lady?" he asked. "From the thing? With the thermostat?" I smiled. "I might be." He held up a flyer for a school trip overseas. "My mom's scared," he said. "But I want to go." I invited them both in and we looked at the itinerary and made a list labeled "Unexpected." And when they left they were still scared and still going. Which is the point. People started sending me their checklist. I added a neighbor's number. I put a space heater on a smart plug. We wrote down where the passports are. I put them all in a folder labeled Show Up Kit, and with a few friends from the Grief Center, we made a little website that anyone could print for free. It didn't feel like a platform. It felt like a kitchen table and an extra chair. And because life is not a straight line, the relapse came. On the morning of the scholarship's second award ceremony, Troy sent me a screenshot of a booking confirmation to a golf weekend. "Forgot the date," he typed. For a minute, no, an hour. The old heat rose in my chest, all those times I'd been replaced by convenience. I didn't text Eleanor or Linda. I sat at the table with the napkin and the rules and I wrote myself a script. Then I called him. "You forgot," I said. "That's data, not destiny. Here's what happens now. You call the resort and cancel. You text Angela and apologize for missing last year's ceremony when you arrived late. You show up early today and set up chairs. You don't center yourself. You leave without making it a redemption story." He could have argued. He didn't. "Yes," he said. "I'm sorry." He showed up early and set up chairs. He left on time. He didn't ask for a cookie. Progress is sometimes just the absence of a speech. Work moved forward. I shipped the second version of the reporting framework. Rena forwarded the client's praise with a note. "Bring your blueprint to the leadership off-site." At the off-site, in a room full of people who talk in pastel bullet points, I said, "We measure what we fund. We fund what we name. Let's name care." When someone asked if that was too soft for operations, I said, "People are not the opposite of productivity." And then I shut my laptop and we went to lunch and nothing caught on fire. The city's promise didn't dissolve into headlines past. A year from the night I asked for a ride, the station ran a small follow-up no one was required to watch. And it was just Michael standing by the river saying, "Sometimes the coda is the point," and a graphic of resources scrolling slow enough for someone to write them down. No dramatic music. No confrontation in a hallway. Just a man delivering a list like a gift. And then there was the night the power went out in our neighborhood, a storm that sounded like a freight train dragging chains through trees. In the blackout, phone screens lit the block in small squares. I knocked on Diane's door with a flashlight. She knocked on mine 10 minutes later with candles. Dad called to say, "I can be there in 12 minutes if you need me." I didn't, but the offer landed like a blanket. Mom texted, "I boiled water for coffee on the camping stove, want some?" "Yes," I typed. "Please." She brought it in a thermos with 2 mugs and said, "I didn't know if you take sugar anymore." And I said, "I never did," and we smiled because sometimes the long way back includes the smallest maps. I keep the napkin in a frame now. Not because rules are holy, but because that napkin is proof that a family can choose a different script. Next to it is the stone from Singapore. Next to that, Sophia's drawing from our other story, the crown cap with stars. Because a child's idea of coronation is simply another word for finishing something hard. So here is where I leave you for now. It is late. The house hums. The river keeps its own counsel. On the table are the things that remade me. A thermostat set to warm, a key on a ring for a neighbor, a letter from a father who learned to ask questions, a list of names of strangers who became kin by answering a knock. I am not the woman who waited by the carousel with a phone that stayed quiet. I am the woman who built a bench by the door so there would be somewhere to sit while I put on my shoes to go meet myself where I am. If you made it here, if somewhere in this you heard your own empty chair, your own cold kitchen, your own porch light, stay a minute with me in this ending that is not an ending. Breathe. Text the person who will answer. And if you don't have one yet, let this be the sign you needed to start building your bench anyway. And if this story gave you steadiness, drop "I'm here" in the comments so the next exhausted stranger scrolling at 2 a.m. sees proof they're not alone. Tap like. It's a small action that pushes this toward the people who need a hand on their back. And if you want more true stories of boundaries, repair, and the kind of justice that looks like a chair pulled up to a table, subscribe. We're building a community that shows up not just in the big dramatic moments, but in the quiet ones where a thermostat ticks up 1 degree and someone knocks on a door, and a city keeps a promise to a widow who once asked one winter night for a ride.